Thank you so much for coming, Professor Dr. Mccarthy. I know you told me not to say it, but I have to say it. You're also one of the Fed members, former. You work with the Fed, and you are with Jefferies. You're the senior economist, so you're the right person to ask. What's going on with Fed? Why did Fed not taper? Can you elaborate and can you put a light on it?
They weren't ready for it. And I thought that they signaled ahead of time that they were not ready for it. All along, Bernanke has repeated over and over again that the decision to taper would be data dependent. And also he said it's not predetermined as far as the timing is concerned.
They were not ready, but were we not ready?
Oh, the markets were ready. In fact, the markets decided back in May that the Fed would taper in September. So they completely ignored, Bernanke telling us that the timing was not predetermined. And of course, recently we've had some weak data. Inflation continues to be well below target. So it just wasn't right. From the standpoint of the Fed pursuing the dual mandate, which is full employment and stable inflation, this was not the time to start removing accommodation. And I thought they sent that signal pretty clearly.
And it's pretty clear. But one thing is not clear. Are they going to taper at any time, and when? When is not clear, right?
Well, when is not completely clear, but I think it's going to happen either at the meeting in late October or it will happen at the meeting in mid-December.
That's your expectation, late October or mid-December of this year. It's definitely going to happen this year. Okay.
I don't think you can say definitely, but I think it's a high probability.
According to your projection.
So as long as we start to see some improvement in the economic data and inflation starts moving back up towards target, the Fed will very slowly and gradually reduce the size of the purchases. So I think the first reduction is only going to be 10 billion. So, and that really is not going to have a major effect on the size of the day-to-day purchases. Keep in mind they do 20 per month. So if you only cut the size of the purchases initially by 10 billion, it really doesn't have all that much of an effect on the magnitude of what the Fed is buying on a day-to-day basis.
I read your reports on a regular basis, and I love them. They come from Professor Dr. Mccarthy, Jefferies, and it's a nice, brief summary. And I love to read them, and I would love them to be shared by our audience as well. In terms of the minutes, let's go back to the minutes. Okay. It was 9-1. I think it was Esther George who said no, as always. Right. But what else did you see in the minutes that would be interesting to us going forward?
Well, I think again, the most important thing is the Fed continues to tell us that it's the economy driving the decision to taper. But they also made a very slight change in the wording of one of the sentences. That previously the Fed had been talking about the possibility of either increasing or decreasing the size of the purchases. And yesterday they changed that to tell us that the decision to decrease the size of the purchases, again, was dependent on the economy. So it's quite clear.
Just decrease, they said, right?
Yeah.
So that's important to underline, right?
It's important because it means that they're talking about an asymmetric risk, and that is if they make any changes to the size of the purchases, they're only going to reduce them. And again, I think that can happen probably as early as the October FOMC meeting, and I think we can be very comfortable that will happen no later than December.
But we were talking about this before the show, before the program started, but let's talk about it again. Is this even gonna impact the market, the equity markets? Of course, all the other markets were affected by that too, commodities and also the bond markets. But did they price it in already? Are we gonna see any further impact on them?
Well, I think there will be an impact, but I think it will be pretty limited. Keep in mind, for example, that the yield on the 10-year Treasury rose 140 basis points without the Fed doing anything, just talking about tapering. Now, the reason for that was that there were some misconceptions on the part of, I think, primarily leveraged investors, that the Fed was going to continue QE maybe forever. And the Fed was concerned that that view was causing a bubble in the financial markets and the Treasury market specifically. So that's why they started talking about tapering. And the sheer talking about it caused rates to rise quite substantially. And of course, the stock market sold off for a while too. But I think the markets now have pretty much come to grips with that. So when the Fed starts the process, I think we'll probably put some upward pressure on rates, but I think it will be very moderate and spread out over a long period of time.
I agree. Just testing the waters. If that had such an impact, he's a little, I guess, right now he's having a cold feet. How about the New one. Everyone is talking about the candidate. Who's going to be the new Fed head? There were these candidates, many, right? That Obama added. Larry Summers gone. That was interesting, right? The way that the market priced it in. And then we have other Donald Kohn and Janet Yellen, and we have also, I think, Lyle Blair. She's one of the highest executives. But who do you think is going to be, and most importantly, who is going to be the best for the markets?
Well, the obvious choice, and I think the most logical choice, is Janet Yellen.
Janet Yellen.
And I think it's a bit of a mystery as to why the White House hasn't already selected her.
Why is this a mystery? What is so difficult? You're not the only one asking.
I have no idea. Well, let's go back to Larry Summers for a minute, okay? Brilliant guy. He has devoted significant amount of time of his life to public policy, but he really is a fiscal policy expert, not a monetary policy expert. So that was one of the reasons why it created a little bit of confusion, because there wasn't much of a track record there, and the markets were nervous about what Summers might do if he became the Fed chair.
Also the conflict of interest. Wasn't he also working for the NASDAQ and Citigroup as a consultant, and he's going to regulate them? How do you read that?
That's yeah, I really don't know a whole lot about that, to be honest with you. But there was a big pushback among the Democrats, not even the Republicans. So the president wasn't able to get enough support in his own party for Larry Summers.
He didn't want to take them ahead.
That's why he had to leave.
That's true.
So then that again left the obvious choice to be Janet Yellen, but there still has been no announcement from the White House, which creates the impression that for some reason the White House is uncomfortable with her.
Why?
I have no idea.
Janet Yellen? Because
I think she would be outstanding.
Isn't she parallel to Bernanke's policies?
Well, she's worked very closely with him. She has, yes, indeed. In fact, I think she's even enhanced some of the ideas that Bernanke has in terms of the conduct of monetary policy.
Right.
So, to me, it's an obvious choice. Another terrific choice would be Don Kohn, who is a former vice chair, who has now moved off from the Fed for the last couple of years, but he could come back. So those two, both of them would be terrific. They both have enormous credibility within the financial community, within the central bank community, and frankly, I think among the public at large. So it really would be in the interest of the U.S. and the financial markets and monetary policy to get this resolved quickly, because an important aspect of Fed monetary policy is forward guidance. But forward guidance only has credibility if you know who is going to be running the Fed at future time periods. So if Bernanke today could say, well, I don't want to raise rates for the next couple of years, and then you get someone else who comes in, they may feel differently.
They may feel differently.
So we really need to get this resolved quickly. It has caused uncertainty in the markets. It did cause short-term rates to rise when it looked like Larry Summers was going to be the next Fed chair.
The candidate, right?
So hopefully this will get done very quickly, and hopefully it will be one of the people. And one other possibility is Bernanke stays on himself.
Oh yeah, I saw that at Wall Street Journal this morning. Do you think Bernanke could continue to stay, would be willing to stay? I know he's a little burned out and he wants to go back to the school as a professor, but do you think that's a possibility? And you're the inside information for us now. Tell us about.
Well, it could happen, but it would have to be an agreement between Bernanke and the president. The president would have to be willing to appoint him for another term, and he'd have to be willing to accept it. But I think you're right. I think he's burnt out. It's possible that he could agree to stay on for a shorter period of time, maybe a year or something like that, in which case then he could at least orchestrate the tapering process that gets the Fed back to a neutral balance sheet.
But if you don't have a third candidate or the fourth by Obama, as you said, for some reason they're throwing all these names out there. And PIMCO wasn't even comfortable with it. I remember, why can't they just announce it, just like you suggested, so to prevent the uncertainty? Another thing I want to point is, I was in the taxi last night, and there was these news. Is Bernanke running away from the government shutdown? October is coming, the whole debt ceiling, and Obama started lobbying this week with the roundtable, discussion with the business leaders and such. So it's approaching. Dr. McCarthy, what do you think? Are we going to be in trouble? Are the government buildings and the government, agencies, they will be shut down? Are the Democrats and Republicans, they are going to fight and not come to an agreement? Was Bernanke concerned about that, scared of that?
If this were in the hands of Ben Bernanke, we'd have nothing to worry about.
Right.
But it's in the hands.
He's been orchestrating from if you look at the 100-year history of the Fed, very well.
Unfortunately, it's in the hands of the politicians. Who, of course, don't like each other. And they let that get in the way of doing their jobs the right way. So I think what we'll probably have is another period of, we'll go through a time period where there's a lot of anxiety about whether or not the government will have to shut down. We even could get a shutdown for a short period of time. But I think eventually what they'll do is agree to a short-term funding bill that takes the government through, somewhere between mid-November and mid-December. And then they'll have to address the debt ceiling because looks like by mid-November, the debt ceiling will become a binding constraint another time. And that's a much more serious problem than whether or not we have funding for the government.
Or not, exactly. And another one that is going to be revealed next week, right? Are we expecting the GDP numbers next week?
Well, we'll get the final version of the second quarter, which the last revision was to 2.5%. It's going to come in around 2.5%.
Is that your projection?
Yes.
So Bloomberg economists, they decreased it looking at the data last week and this week, but yours is 2.5. And also we have some housing numbers. We going forward and looking at also the numbers we had, like the retail and the inflation this week.
Right.
Going forward, are you on the more optimistic side? Would you call yourself as a bullish person in terms of the economic outlook, or are you?
I think things are going to get better, and I think that we can see like the early signs that things are going to get better in some sectors of the economy, but it's still a frustrating
Which sector
process.
are you more optimistic about? And that's my last question.
Well, I think
housing.
Manufacturing is poised to grow a lot faster.
Even though the graph is a little.
Well, if you look at the manufacturing surveys and if you look at durable goods orders,
yes.
There's really a build-up there.
The orders are there, but they're not reflected in the numbers.
Well, but it shows up in the orders, and then it shows up in the actual activity. So that's what's going to happen. I think housing will continue to do better, but not as rapidly as it had been because of the rising rates.
People are scared.
And the Fed,
yes.
acknowledged that this week, that the rising rates had an adverse effect on the rate of improvement of housing. And the last thing is, we really have a lot going on in the energy sector in the U.S., and that's perhaps the most important thing because we are relying less on imported oil. We're the lowest cost producers of natural gas in the universe, and this is allowing us to become more competitive on the international markets because manufacturers are switching from oil to natural gas. That gives them much more of a cost advantage and more cost efficiency. So, all the pieces are there to continue to do better. The biggest problem is that we still have chaos in Washington, and of course, that is something that of course weighs on the confidence of both consumers and the business community.
Thank you so much. I wanted to investigate and elaborate. I want you to elaborate more on the energy, but our time is up. My producers are telling me. Thank you so much for coming. We'll have you back.